another big-ish story that come out this week is Qantas have kept us up to date with these unclaimed COVID credits. Now, this is a kind of palaver that's been going on for a number of years. So during the pandemic, obviously for no fault of any airlines, obviously a lot of flights got cancelled because of either directly because they had to shut the borders or kind of indirectly that people couldn't get on the plane. And there was all sorts of different rules in terms of whether you got your money back, whether you got a flight credit. And there was a lot of criticism, particularly of Qantas, that they weren't proactive enough in telling people their rights, etc. And Rex, and obviously the caveat here is Rex and Qantas, they don't get on. No. But Rex, one of the things they did, partly is a goodwill gesture, but obviously sort of is an attack on Qantas, is that they actually set up a system whereby if either your flight got cancelled due to COVID or if you couldn't get on that flight for any COVID-related reason, they would give you your money back. And in fact, I think at one point they worked out so they would put the money back in your bank account within a week, straight back in there. That was an incredibly generous way of doing things. I think every airline should have done that. And that wasn't done by a lot of larger airlines all around the world. But we had a situation where there was hundreds and hundreds of millions of COVID credits that Qantas had mounted up. And they kept pushing back the deadline before they all get wiped out. But they have made progress, to Qantas' credit, in getting people to redeem them. Jake, tell us a little bit more about what the situation is now.
Yeah, so back in March 2020, the initial figure of COVID credits that were issued for flights that had to be cancelled or postponed or whatever due to COVID was around $2 billion. It's dipping towards $400 million now. So there's been a lot of people who've been using these COVID credits. Of this figure, you've got around $250 million booked direct with Qantas. 150 million through travel agents. Around 80% of these credits, says Qantas, are refundable. 62% of them are worth less than $500. But one thing that Qantas has done is they've also launched an online tool, not to be confused with the 3 online tools in this studio, to help customers find... Hey, I'm including myself in this number, to help customers find their bookings. So apparently can track bookings up to 3 years old that may have changed several times. And Qantas is basically saying, we've extended the deadline for these flights, for these credits is going to be the end of the year. For flights leaving, before 31st of December next year. We have extended this 3 times. We're not going to extend it any further. This is your last chance. Use this online tool to find your credits and claim them before they go away.
There's 2 sides to this story, and I do try to be quite impartial when we talk about it. Now, to Qantas's credit, no pun intended, they have made genuinely a lot of effort to try and help people, to try to alert them to the fact they've got credits. And the argument that there's going to be a cut-off point for this is that they are running a viable business. They cannot just have all this money stacked up. At some point, they need to know what situation they're in. So I do totally understand that. However, on the kind of the flip side, one of the things Qantas said in their kind of media statement this week was, we can't just put all the money back in people's bank accounts because a lot of people's debit cards would have expired by this point, which is correct. However, what they could have done at the time was just automatically put it all back in people's bank accounts, just like Rex did. So there was a precedent for them doing this. What they also make a point of saying, quite rightly, is that the majority of people in the majority of circumstances are actually entitled to a refund rather than credit. And that is because if obviously the airline cancels the flight, then they have to give you your money back. Obviously, that's not the passenger's fault. So the argument is they could actually have done a lot more. Now, again, to sort of criticise Qantas or to criticise, and a lot of airlines did a similar thing, the cost of flying now is considerably higher than it was pre-COVID. So if you are using your flight credit, it's very unlikely you will be able to get an exact like-for-like replacement. Chances are what's going to happen is you will book a similar flight to what you had to before, and then you're going to have to spend a bit more money, which means they're going to make a bit more money out of this.
Absolutely.
What's your view on this here, Bruno and Chris?
So look, a couple of things come to mind here. Number one, Regarding refunds, there is a particular law that airlines must follow, and the law does state, so this isn't something Qantas is just making up. This is a law that all airlines globally are bound by. A refund must be processed back to the very original form of payment. So if you've used a credit or debit card and that credit card is now expired, the refund must go back to that original card. However, the banks obviously have your new card details. We'll see a refund come back and go, oh, hang on, this card's expired. Let's look into this a bit further. Or this is the new card number. Let's send the money here. So there's a process behind the system. It just takes a little bit longer. But there is an international global law that requires all airlines globally to refund back to the original form of purchase. So if you purchase a ticket through a travel agent and then decide to cancel, the refund must go back to the travel agent. If you go into an airline booking office and pay cash, et cetera, et cetera.
Let's move this away. It's a bit unfair just to pick on Qantas because this again happened all around the world. And the airline sort of argument was that if we were to suddenly give all of this money back, we'd be in a world of trouble because, it's COVID, everything was shutting down. We can't just lose all of this money we thought we had. But then the passenger would say, that's not our problem.
Absolutely.
If you've cancelled our flight, we want our money back. We don't want to be on the phone to customer services for hours and hours and hours and then find out there's some very long-winded credit system that they have to navigate. They just want their money back. Jake, what do you think of this here? Because there's different ways of looking at it.
You ever ordered with Menulog, Adam?
I do sometimes, actually, yeah.
Have you ever had a problem with Menulog?
Oh, many times.
Yeah, and they try to you ask them for a refund because your thing hasn't shown up, and they say, well, we'll give you a voucher for the amount of your meal, or the nearest $10 or whatever above that. But the tricky thing is, Adam, this is how they get you. The tricky thing with Menulog is when you spend one of their vouchers that they give you, you have to pay. The cost of the meal has to be at least $1 more than the value of the voucher. So what happens is you get your voucher for like $30 for a meal that, I don't know, cost you $27, and you think, gravy, I've got $30. But you have to pay an extra $1. You're giving them more money.
Yep.
The man just wants his pizza, and he wants it now.
I live in an apartment complex, which is actually absolutely a nightmare for people to get into, and for people to find my place. So this happens to me all the time. But relating this back to Qantas, it seems Qantas, and again, in fairness, Qantas has said about 80% of these things can be refunded, and if you want a refund, we can arrange that. So in fairness, they are refunding people now. But if I don't know, this whole flight credits thing, and with some airlines, you can only redeem these flight credits on like crappier seats than you would otherwise have had on worse flights.
So look, where I think number one, no one saw this coming. No one knew how to handle it. There wasn't a rule book for this. We could have learned some lessons from SARS when SARS hit a few years ago. We could have learned some lessons from 9/11 when aircrafts were grounded with 9/11 as well. However, there wasn't a playbook to handle a global pandemic that shut borders globally. What I will say, some airlines handled it better than others. So some airlines had rules where your credit could only be used on the same route that you were originally booked to fly on, in the same cabin class you were originally booked to fly on, with the same passengers you were originally booked to fly with. Some airlines went, you know what, we're just going to make it easy. Here's a credit. You've got, if your original ticket was $2,000, you've got $2,000 to spend with us on any route destination that you like, with anyone that you like. You can gift it to family or friends, whatever. They made it easy for customers to redeem a credit. So kudos to the airlines that made it easy. Sucks to be you to the airlines that made it hard. And unfortunately, the airlines that made it hard are now in this situation where they've still got unused credits going, how are we going to get rid of these credits? And if they take the money from the customer without trying to allow the customer to redeem the credit, then they're only going to get more bad press for it.
I do agree that it was a very difficult situation for airlines. It was also very difficult for the people that were in those call centres or that were at the other end.
I was one of them. I got redeployed to the call centre for 2 years.
This is great.
The front lines.
On the front. Or we say this every week.
In the trenches, Chris.
In the trenches, getting his hands dirty. Is there no job in the industry you ever done? You were there taking those angry calls. That must have been awful.
Look, it was like, it was tough. And I was redeployed to a call centre. As we know, I worked for Air New Zealand before joining the Australian Aviation team. I was a business development manager, so out on the road looking after travel agents. Obviously, borders shut. We can't see travel agents. I was one of the lucky Air New Zealanders that was redeployed to the call centre, and it was heartbreaking. Some of the calls that I would take, people trying to get home for a loved one is passing. And they need to get home to say farewell, or a loved one has passed and they need to get home for a funeral. And there was nothing I could do because some flights were capacity restricted. Flights into Australia for a short while were capacity restricted. And an Auckland-Sydney flight could operate with only 20 passengers on board. And once it was full with 20 passengers, or once 20 passengers were booked and approved by the Australian government, that was it. No one else could get on that plane.
It's quite a unique situation, I'd imagine, because essentially you're taking the blame, or you're hearing the abuse, or you're hearing the sad stories for something which is not remotely your fault, or that you had no control over at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there were some beautiful people on the phone that were just like, I get it, it's not your fault. I just need to vent. I need to get this off my chest. So not only were we taking calls trying to assist people and help people where we could, we were grief counsellors, we were guidance counsellors, we were just an ear for them to chew.
When people got angry, I bet you gave back as good as you got. When people got horrible, I bet you...
No, you can't get angry at the situation.
Yep.
And these people were in an unfortunate situation. Look, the way I saw it, they weren't lashing out at Chris, the person. They were lashing out at the system. They were lashing out at the airline. They were lashing out at COVID.
So was this like the cabin crew training as well? Because presumably you had similar situations when you were doing that job that you were listening to on the phone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about empathy and kindness. It goes a very long way, and you have to appreciate each situation is different. Don't get me wrong. There were plenty of calls where as soon as I picked up and said, "Kia ora, welcome to Air New Zealand, this is Chris," they were like, F this and F that and screw you and screw this. And I was like, if you're going to continue to talk to me that way, I will terminate this call, like right off the bat. So, yes, you had to have a backbone, and yes, you had to kind of stick it where you needed to stick it when you needed to stick it. But at the same time, you needed to appreciate the situation and show a bit of kindness and empathy. No one had a playbook for this. No one knew how this was going to unfold. No one saw this coming. Could you imagine globally airlines all around the world crippled because someone sneezed somewhere?